Chapter 9 of The Masked Empire by Patrick Weeks. Briella walked south towards Phalason's Dalish clan. She had dreamed of them as a child, the mythical elves who lived alone with no humans to rule them. It had been as fantastical and impossible as stories of the Fade. On days when Selene had been cruel, she had imagined living among them as a princess, forcing Selene to clean her clothes. On days when Selene had been kind, she imagined both of them playing in a land where spirits did the cleaning and nobody was a servant. As Briella had grown older, she had, like most elves, entertained the occasional thought of running off to find the Dalish. Everyone claimed to have a friend who had a cousin who had left the alienage or the Lord's house and found the legends of the Dales, only coming back briefly with fine clothes and mystical face tattoos. But as a servant in Selene's family's household, Briella had gotten to hear stories about the raids, the hidden trade routes, the banditry, and the plans to wipe out the renegade elves that had lived in the forests to the south. She had realized that they were just another group. There was no magical spirit realm. There were no princesses. Then came the day in the reading room, and her flight to the Dales, and Phalason. She looked over at him. They had been walking for more than a week now, adding to the food in Sir Michel's pack and what she and Phalasson could bring down in the forest. And her mentor showed no sign of fatigue. Behind them, Selene's face was lined with pain after long days in the saddle, and even Sir Michel showed some discomfort, though he had hid behind his chevalier stoicism. "What will they think of us?" she asked Phalasson, and he looked over, one eyebrow raised. "Your people." "The Dalish." Phalasson let out a slow breath, thinking over the question. "We'll have to gain the loyalty clan by clan. They don't have much contact with each other. Don't want to risk an attack from the Shemlin, comprising the safety of more than one clan. Of course, staying deliberately separated has led to the clans growing more and more different, losing their commonalities. I imagine that's a metaphor for something." Phalasson smiled. "It'll be interesting to see." "Interesting." Briella looked back at Selene and Michel, who were just out of earshot if Briella kept her voice down. That's an understated way of phrasing it. "Accurate, though." Phalasson smiled as a falling leaf twirled past his face. "A thunderstorm is interesting. A wildfire is interesting. I have stood in the middle of both and watch things change." "You do not think your people will help Selene?" "Why in the world would a Dalish help a Shemlin?" "Because she has helped them." Briella felt her hands clench into fists and relaxed them with an effort. "How much better are the elves of Relay because of her rule?" Phalasson sighed. "You make two mistakes, Dalen." "I apologize, Haren. What are my mistakes?" "You say that she helped the elves of Relay," Phalasson said. "This is untrue. What gains they have made are due to your work, not hers." "With respect." "Oh, stop." His voice was patient but firm, and he did not look over at her. "Without you, your Empress would have been no friend to the elves. Even her rival Gaspard could see that." Briella ducked her head. "But if their lives are better, does the cause matter?" "There was a young noble in fair Arlthon," Phalasson said, "and it happened that the elven king lost one of his 2 daughters to a serpent's bite. At the ceremony to commemorate her life, the young noble saw an elven lady so fair and perfect that his heart broke. But by the laws of ancient Arlthon, he was forbidden to speak with her during the ceremony, and he did not learn who she was, so he could not ask her family to court her. The young noble prayed to the gods that he might meet the elven lady again. He prayed to Mythil for love, to Dermathen for the secret of the elven lady's name, and to Anduril for luck in the hunt for this woman. And finally, he made an offering to Fenharel, and the dread wolf was the only one who answered. In a dream that night, he told the noble what he needed to do to see his heart's love again. Do you know what he said?" After a moment's thought, Briella sighed. "Kill the king's other daughter." Flasson chuckled. You begin to think like Fen Harel. It was only logical, Briella said. There would be another ceremony, and... It was a compliment, Delenn. Flasson shook his head. Causes matter. To understand the truth of events, you must understand why as well as what occurred. The elves of Orlais are better off, but the cause is you, not her. But they are better off. Briella sighed and stepped over a twisting root. You said that I made 2 mistakes. What was the second? Flasson looked over, and behind the lines of the Vlasin, the expression of his face was one of very old sadness. You think of elves as the Shemlin do. Blood or no blood. Knife ears or flat ears. You say that they are better off under Celine's rule. Who are they? The alienage elves? The Dalish? He smiled. And why must the Dalish care for the fate of the elves who live in the cities? After that, they walked for a time in silence. Celine endured the ride with grim resolve. She still wore her own boots and underclothes, what had been custom-tailored to fit perfectly. The stolen armor chafed, but after the first night, she patted the sections that did not fit with skill learned from emergency dress repair at the balls of her youth. There was nothing to do for sore muscles, however, and so she bore the aches in her legs, thighs, and back. And when she would have asked that they stop and rest, and she instead thought of Gaspard, and ran through the 20 muscle exercises that Lady Montillon had taught Celine to allow a young lady to remain poised and beautiful, while standing in full view of a crowd filled with rivals who would seize on any awkward shift as a sign of weakness. At night, when Michelle and Briella's Dalish elf allowed them to stop, Celine stretched, and then ran through drills with her daggers. She carried more magic on her wrists and throat and fingers than most outside the circle would see in a single lifetime, including both the ring Lady Montillon had given her, and the ring that sent flames licking out of any weapon she wielded. That magic had given her sufficient strength and skill to kill a few unsuspecting soldiers. Against Gaspard and his chevaliers, though, Celine would need to be better. And for all she knew, she might well be facing Gaspard himself before this was finished. She was at the edge of a clearing in the firelight a fortnight later, running through a set of drills that Lady Montillon had called the Butterfly, while Flasson and Michelle plotted tomorrow's ride, when Briella said from behind her, "You're off on the second strike." Celine stopped and looked over her shoulder, hiding with a closed-mouthed smile how sadly out of breath the exercises had left her. Briella had stripped off her armor and looked tired, dirty, and still lovely, nevertheless, even as little more than a shadow kissed the golden light from the campfire. It was the first time that Briella had spoken to Celine beyond the simple logistics of which trail to follow, or when to take the rabbit off the fire. Celine had given her lover space, waiting for a sign. "I don't believe so," Celine said, keeping her voice calm and non-argumentative. The lead hand parries the oncoming thrust, and the backhand slashes across the upper arm to stop a counterattack before you move in to control the throat with both blades. She demonstrated in the air, her daggers catching the firelight as she slid them through the air against an imaginary opponent. There was no actual fire on the blades. She had removed all of her magical tokens to get a better sense of how far out of practice she was. No. Briella slid her own daggers out with unconscious grace, then sliced through the air. The first isn't just a parry. It's a slash to the enemy's wrist. The second strike isn't to his striking arm. It's to his throat. Her strike was higher than Celine's had been, a fast flick of the wrist, whose grace and deceptive beauty gave the butterfly its name. That ensures that you're close enough to control the throat with your next move. You're certain? You always preferred Lady Montillon's archery lessons to the knife work. But I have used both, Briella said, and it is the throat. Celine smiled. If you've already slashed the throat, controlling it hardly seems necessary. Armor? Briella asked, or magical protection, or if you're facing a darkspawn with tougher skin, or some creature from the Fade. Or if you're using a peasant's belt knife instead of a gleaming silverite blade because you've lost your throne. She stepped in closer, and anger touched her face, drawing lines on her beautiful skin. Things in the real world are often not as perfect as they are in the palace at Val Royale. Celine sighed. Bria. Damn you, Celine. Brielle's big, beautiful eyes filled with tears. They caught the light from the fire, shimmering in the darkness like a cat's as Briella stepped closer. The pulse in her neck fluttered fast, though she moved gracefully as always. Don't explain it. I know why. I just wish you had cared more. It would have been a lot sweet in the palace for a few years, nothing more. Celine kept her voice low, aware that Michelle and Phelasson had stopped planning and were looking their way. It would have changed nothing for us. Your hair still stinks of smoke from the people you burned, Briella said. That is a change. The dead leaves crackled under Celine's feet as she stepped forward. How many wars can our empire survive in such a short time? I wanted my legacy to be the university, the beauty and culture that made us the envy of the world. Instead, I may be known as the empress under whom Orlais fell. You have the luxury of mourning Halamstral's elves and holding my heart hostage. Sitting on my throne, I see every city in the empire. If I must burn one to save the rest, I will weep, but I will light the torch. Briella swallowed. You're not weeping, as far as I can tell, nor are you sitting on your throne. She stepped away, her movements fast and jerky. With your permission, your radiance, I shall go indulge in myself in my luxury. Celine watched her lover stalk back to the campfire. Then, because Briella had been right, Celine went back to practicing and aimed her second strike higher. The next morning, they left the golden red of the woods and skirted the edges of farmsteads already bare in anticipation of the autumn chill. After days in the woods, darting from one open area to the next, with an eye out for Gaspard's men, gave Celine pause. Celine looked at the sky, which showed high clouds and the promise of a chilly day. Is it safe to be out in the open? She asked Michelle. I fear we have little choice, Majesty. Michelle looked across the plains, eyes scanning the distant horizon. To stay in the safety of the forest, we would have to circle far to the east. That gives Gaspard too long to find us. The farms and plains should be safe enough this far from where Gaspard would expect to find us. There's a small village near a lake up ahead that's far removed from any major roads. It should be able to get supplies and information, according to Briella's knife ear. He grimaced at the mention of Phelasson, darting a look at the elves up ahead. You don't trust him? Michelle frowned. He said nothing yet to mistrust, but he's Dalish. He's as much an enemy to you as Gaspard and his men. He chuckled. Though at least he has the courtesy to let us know with those ridiculous tattoos. Celine had read more than one treatise on the Dalish. The university did not think the Dalish worth a class of their own, but they were studying in history courses covering all of Thedas. She thought she remembered the tattoos Michelle mocked were signs to honor one or another of their ancient gods. She had always found their culture interesting, exotic, and infinitely sad. How much knowledge had been lost to scholars the world over because the Dalish had refused to admit their empire had fallen? How long would they hide in the wilderness before acknowledging that the world had changed? We are safe, though, to the best of your knowledge? Celine asked. Yes. Michelle was still scanning the distant horizon. Phelasson said that if Gaspard's soldiers were patrolling the area, they would have sent the birds wheeling in the sky. How very elven of him, Celine smiled. Then if we are free, let us make use of our mounts. We can wait for Briella and Phelasson in the village. She kicked her mount's flanks without waiting for a response, and the gelding, after a moment's confusion, broke into a gallop. They thundered past the elves, Briella shooting Celine a shocked look, and then Celine was alone on the plains. The gelding had been skittish and prone to bolt to begin with. Once it became clear that this was no panic, no battle, but simply a chance to run, it embraced the ride. Celine felt his smooth stride, the bunch of flow of liquid muscles sliding smoothly as grass whipped her legs. She clung to the reins, hunched forward, and the smell of cold wind wet horse in her nose, free for the moment of everything but the ride. After a time, when she felt the gelding tire, she let him slow back to a fast trot that he could likely maintain for hours at a time, though Celine's legs would regret it later. Up ahead in the distance, she saw the silvery glint of a small lake and the huddled buildings around it. A slash of dirt through the grass from the northwest marked the small road Halom Sharal. She heard hoofbeats behind her, and a moment later, Michel dropped his charger to a trot as well, patting Chertienne on the flank. She half expected some word of censure from her champion for galloping off without warning, but he simply gave her a tiny smile and shook his head. She found herself almost disappointed. Debating an empress's right to take a frivolous ride would have been a lovely way to pass the time. A moment later, Michel stared at the village in the distance, frowning. Something is wrong. What is it? He squinted. There are fields to the west and north, but they haven't been harvested. The crops will be wasted if they're not out of the ground soon. And if the lake holds fish, there should be boats on the water at this hour. Why, Sir Michel, how very rustic of you to notice such things, Celine chuckled. One would think you grew up in a village yourself. Michel blushed. It is my duty to know His Majesty. I could be wrong. I doubted my champion. Shall we wait for Brielle and Philasson? At her suggestion, Michel grimaced. Elves in a village like this, that they may do more harm than good. Perhaps the village deals with the Dalish, but perhaps they attack elves on sight as Dalish raiders. Celine nodded and looked back to where Brielle and Philasson were specks in the distance. Then let us continue our own, with care. They rode in at an easy trot, joining the road and coming into the village from the northwest. As soon as they passed the low fences that passed for the village's defenses, Celine could see the wrongness. The village was silent, and it smelled of ashes. The wooden buildings, simple but sturdy, with fresh thatching in preparation for the coming winter, were whole and undamaged, but as they rode into the open dirt clearing that marked the village square, Celine saw not a single soul. Pyres. Michel pointed, and Celine saw stacks of charred black wood in the center of the square. There were too many to count, some large enough for a group, and some small and ringed with stones to mark a peasant's chantry burning. Their loved ones in chantry fires, and the attackers burned as a group. Michel nodded, then raised his voice and called out, "Hello, the village! Anyone here?" There was a long moment of silence, broken only by shutters rattling in the wind. Celine shook her head. Someone must have burned the bodies. She saw the spear from the corner of her eye and turned, but it sailed wide, missing her and Michel by yards. It had come from one of the shops behind them, but she could not be certain which. "I have no quarrel with you," Michel called out, "but I am sworn to protect this lady. Threaten her, and as a chevalier, I swear I will burn your village to the ground." He drew his sword and rode slowly towards the buildings. "Come out, and I swear no harm upon you." They came out. Commoners. Peasants. An old man in butcher's leathers. A matronly woman with a sloppily bandaged arm. Children peeking out from behind doors and windows. Celine took them all in with her gaze, committing them to memory. Their clothes were dirty. Their eyes were hooded with fatigue and fear. They would see Gaspard die for this. She would see Gaspard die for this. They came back before the the harvest, said the butcher. Rode in and took what they wanted. We didn't give them any trouble, my lord. Did they say why? Michelle asked. He had sheathed his sword. Not at first, said the matronly woman. By the flower on her clothes, Celine guessed her to be a baker. But when they were deep in their cups, they said they were to watch for trouble from Jader. Jader, the butcher spat. 2 days ago, Lady Cyril's men rode in and cut down every man and woman working in the fields, killed our guards, killed everyone in the village square. When they finished killing the other soldiers, they fired arrows out onto the water, killed most of our boys in the boats. They took all the food they could find. They spent the night. A collective flinch splashed across the cloud. Said we've been assisting enemies of the throne, that this was a lesson to anyone who'd help Gaspard's men. At the last, his voice broke. My lord, I don't even know who Gaspard is. Celine looked around the village square. She saw the tiny scorch marks, the spots where the blood hadn't fully soaked into the earth. The men from Jader, loyal to her, fighting for her throne. She swallowed. You need to bring in the harvest, she said. Michelle turned to her, one eyebrow raised slightly. I understand that you are scared. There are nobles fighting in battles that have already hurt you. She looked at the pyres in the park. But you must bring in the harvest. You must go back out on the lake and bring in the fish. Otherwise you won't survive the winter. Half of our village is dead, my lady, the butcher said, his fists clenched and his face red, though he kept his eyes on the ground. Then that's less food you'll need, she said. But you need to get back to the work, nevertheless, unless you wish to lose the whole of your village. And if they come back? The baker asked, scratching at her bandaged arm. Welcome them with open arms, she said, without hesitation. Bow to them, whichever noble they say they serve. Give them what food they ask for, and hide enough so that you'll survive even if they take a great deal. She looked at the baker. And if they spend the night, throw them a feast, fortify the wine, and slit their throats as they sleep. The baker looked up, surprised, and then nodded. And what of you, my lord and lady? The butcher asked. He was sweating, though the morning air was cool. What would you have of us? Celine met his nervous look with a steady stare. Only what you can spare. They rode back out of the village a short time later and found Briella and Philassen by the road. Are you all right? Briella asked Celine, and Celine flinched. She had clearly become too used to hiding behind the mask, if her face gave her away so easily. We're fine, Michelle said roughly. The village is a waste. Come on, we need to keep moving. Celine nodded and followed him as they circled well around the village and headed south. She watched it as they rode, looking back every few moments, until it was a speck in the distance, with a tiny glimmer of the lake next to it. When it was gone, finally, she turned and let out a sigh. You spoke well, Majesty, Michelle said without looking over. I did not even learn the name of the village. It does not matter, he grimaced. Their story is one of dozens. Every soldier who has served in battle has seen it, at one time or another. And Gaspard knew. Celine felt her jaw clench and release the tension. At court, they would have tittered at her lack of control. But then, they were so far away from court today. He so desires the throne that he would put countless lives through that. I don't know that it ever occurred to him, Majesty. We will end this. Celine gripped the reins until her fingers ached. My people deserve better. Michelle said nothing, but he nodded solemnly, and for a while, that was enough. In his camp southeast of Halam Sharal, Gaspard sat on a sturdy, collapsible chair by one of the crackling fires and drank hot spiced wine while taking reports from his scouts. Who knew Lady Cyril had it in her? He asked Remick, destroying her own villages just to burn us out of them. Impressive woman. Indeed, Remick frowned. And the report from that little village. What was it? You say the scouts saw hoof prints? The scout nodded respectfully. Lac d'argent, my lord. The villagers insisted they had seen no one, but my men saw hoof prints that they swore came from a well-shod warhorse, and not some farmer's old mare. Well, Gaspard said, nodding. It's something. First damned hint we've had of her in any village or town. They need something to go on. And it wouldn't be Celine's elven handmaid, who had earned several guards a whipping with her daring escape. Remick sniffed and pulled uncomfortably at his neck of his riding leathers. You can direct this war from Val Royeaux, my lord. Are you certain it is seemly for you to chase Celine yourself? They've been riding lightly, checking the most likely locations where Celine might try to hide. It was hardly a forced march. And still, Remick acted like Gaspard was dragging him through the deep roads. Gaspard nodded to the scout commander, who bowed and retreated from earshot. Sitting in Val Royeaux, I'd be surrounded by Celine's nobles trying to fight me, arguing that Celine could still be found and that I had no right. Meanwhile, my nobles will be demanding to know what is in it for them, he said, sipping his wine, and threatening me with vague waves of the hand if I didn't do things their way. We can afford a few days to search. If I come back with Celine dead, no man in this empire will get in my way. But for now, Remick pointed out, Lady Cyril is in your way. You took Halam Sharal by surprise, but you do not have all your forces. I doubt you can take Jader if Lady Cyril is prepared for you, and we have run into more of her scouts each day. Do you have a suggestion, Remick? Gaspard asked, or are you just pissing in my wine? Remick pursed his lips. Put out word that Celine is dead. Go back to Halam Sharal, gather your forces, and march to Val Royeaux with your armor shining. If she shows herself to fight your claim, kill her. If not, he gestured casually, once you sit upon the throne, she may complain from exile like a barking dog, for all the good that it does her. Gaspard grunted. I will not say that she is dead, not when I do not know it. You said she was sleeping with her elven handmaid, Remick said, raising an eyebrow. I suggested it was possible, and in any event, that was the game, Gaspard said, dismissing it as an absent wave. This is honorable battle. There is a line that no chevalier will cross. Gaspard. Remick said it bluntly, and Gaspard looked over, surprised that Remick had it in him. The nobles allied to your cause came to help you seize the throne, not kill the Empress. You wish to justify your claim to the throne? Make your way to Val Royeaux and prove to them that you can rule. A call came before Gaspard could reply, and he sat up as one of his scouts came into the firelight. My lord, we found an enemy soldier in the woods and took him alive. By his colors he belonged to the Empress, not Jader. Good man. Bring him here. The scout bowed and left at a jog, and Gaspard gave Remick a grin. Or perhaps our luck is changing. Remick raised an eyebrow. He's much more likely a simple deserter than one of her cohorts, Gaspard. That's why we questioned him. Gaspard heard the rattle of armor as the prisoner was brought into the firelight, one of his men at each arm. The soldier was a grizzled old veteran, and his padded tunic was marked with both old blood and new, showing that he had been taken without a fight. Bring him closer, into the light. His men did as he commanded. Gaspard set his cup down by the fire, stood, and squinted at the man thoughtfully. Finally, he said, How'd they find you? The soldier ducked his head. I was hungry. I caught a fish by the stream. Didn't want to eat it raw, my lord, so I risked a campfire. That's how your men found me. You can train for years, fight with honor in campaigns, and still never learn how to make a campfire that won't be seen from a mile away. Gaspard smiled. So then, how did you end up here? A week's travel from Halam Sharal. The soldier kept his head down, but Gaspard saw the little catch at his jaw. I fled after the battle. I thought I could make it to Jader. Remek made a tiny gesture, and Gaspard nodded. I don't think so. Men, where did you find him? By a small river to the north. Looking for a boat, I wager. Gaspard stepped closer, and a single man, even on foot, would have gotten closer to Jader than this, unless he ran into the men we were blocking the roads. Yes. The soldier nodded jerkily. I ran into your blockade, my lord. I turned back, but then I saw your forces coming, and I thought I could find a village with a boat and escape on the waking sea. He could not meet Gaspard's look, and the words were muttered fast, clearly memorized earlier as his story if it were caught. Remek coughed, and Gaspard looked over in his irritation. Yes, I'm aware that he's lying. He turned back to the soldier. It's not a bad story, soldier, but you're terrible at telling it. And a man in your position? I have to wonder why you'd be lying. He stepped closer still, until the soldier had to look up at him, his eyes baggy with fatigue and darting with fear. I'd expect you to come in surrendering and asking to change sides. After all, you're a veteran, a survivor. You know when the battle is lost. You know to back the right lord. He flinched at that, and Gaspard knew. But you won't, will you? Because you've seen her, he breathed. In these woods, you've seen her. You know she's still alive, and you know where she's going. I don't, the soldier blurted, and if that was true, if desperate. But you could tell me what you know, Gaspard said, and see if your useful information led me to spare your life. I could, my lord. Now the lies were done with, and the soldier straightened and met Gaspard's gaze. But though I am no lord or chevalier, I still have my honor. He squared his soldiers. I am Empress Celine's personal scout, by her decree, and I will die as such. Gaspard met his gaze, then nodded slowly and looked out to where his men stood waiting. He looked back at the soldier. I can respect that. Swift and painless, or in battle? The soldier let out a long and shaky breath, then squared his shoulders. In battle, my lord. Good man. Gaspard gestured to the men, and they stepped away. Gaspard only wore his riding leathers, so he didn't need to worry about giving Celine's soldier armor to ensure that they met on equal terms. Swords! You must be joking, Remek snapped, and Gaspard turned on him. You're a damn fine lord when it comes to the game, Remek, and I'm going to need your help to keep on my throne. But you'll never understand the men who live and die by their blades. He held out a hand without looking, and took the sword that was passed to him. Then he called out, By my honor as a chevalier, if Celine's personal scout defeats me in single combat, he walks away with his armor, his weapons, and 3 days of food. His men called back on their approval with a roar, banging blades on shields. Celine's man took his blade and offered a decent salute. Gaspard returned it, soldier to soldier. Then they moved. Celine's man moved well and had a good eye for distance. Gaspard noted as they both took a few cautious steps. But his relaxed grip was wrong on the blade. It was a finesse grip on a weapon that needed to be held tight and swung hard, and his defensive guard suggested training with a shorter weapon. Gaspard guessed he'd been a spearman, with a short blade for close combat. Gaspard made it quick. A feint that the soldier tried to parry from too far away, years of pike training working against him, followed by a lunge that caught the man in the bicep, a downward slash across the leg, and, without hesitation, a thrust up the ribs. Good man, he said again, holding the man up while the life went out of his eyes. Remek had not stood up from his spot by the campfire. He smiled wryly as Gaspard came over, leaving the servants to clean the blades and dispose of the man's body. I am pleased to see that you survived that completely unnecessary duel, my lord. That wasn't a duel, Gaspard sat. It was an execution, but he died proud, fighting the man who attacked his empress in a single combat. Yes, he was ecstatic, Remek said, glancing over at the body. We could have gotten more information out of him with torture. At Gaspard's look, Remick sighed. He wasn't a noble, Gaspard. Your code would not have applied. He knew nothing worth noting. Gaspard gestured for the scouts, then said quickly, Think, Remick. If he knew where Celine was going, he would either be with her because Celine trusted him, or dead because Celine didn't. Remick frowned, then nodded slowly. So all we know for certain is that he definitely met her. His guilty fear of accidentally revealing something made that plain. Exactly. The scouts came into the firelight, bowing. My lord? Get back to where you found him, Gaspard ordered. Find his trail and follow it back. Somewhere, that man met Celine. Understood, my lord. The scouts bowed and left at a jog. Can they really do that? Remick asked. Follow the trail back for days and find where it intersects with Celine's? Damned if I know, Remick. Gaspard picked his cup back up, squinted at it, and picked out a fly. But I believe it's better than trying to take Jader. And that is chapter 9 of The Masked Empire.